Ray Worring, director of the Investigative Research Field Station located in Helena, Montana, is with us today presenting a colloquium exploring ancient man's indigenous science, entitled Montana, the Last Best Place of Power. We will explore ancient man's extraordinary science and how it was manifest as is evidenced by the stone structures placed on the landscape. Man surrounds himself with stone. He lives in stone houses. He works in buildings of stone. He worships in stone churches. And he is laid to rest in forests of stone. We also enjoy wearing stones as jewelry. Some stones are considered much more sacred than others, such as the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, the Kaaba in Mecca, and Ayers Rock in Australia, one of the oldest natural shrines. Patrick Marsalik, assistant researcher with the Investigative Research Field Station, shows us a site near Helena which contains many rock cairns which were built on the low foothills around the valley, and over 30 rock rings in the meadows below. Rings can be found as high as the 6,000-foot level on the nearby ridges. Like a giant jigsaw puzzle, the pieces are scattered across the landscape. During the colloquium, the researchers will attempt to bring some of these pieces together to see what information they may contain. What did these stone rings, cairns, lines of stone piles, and other petroforms mean to ancient man? Don Robbins, a solid-state chemist, has researched the petroforms with the Dragon Project in the British Isles. He concluded, to his surprise, that a rogue energy exists in the heart of the crystal, and he surmises that this could function as a rudimentary memory, that the petroforms act in some way like a microchip. He further concluded that we may have not only the ability to imprint an electronic trace on the crystal and stone, but also the capacity to trigger the release of this lithic memory in special circumstances. In other words, this may be an explanation for psychometry. The very silence of these structures and their lack of material evidence makes them even more mysterious. The stones cry out. Yet we are left with a feeling that there is an unexplored aspect of these stone structures. Is there a way of discovering their origin and purpose? Can these stones be allowed to speak and to show their secrets? We hope to find valuable clues to help solve this mystery, a secret which ties them into a sacred network, a web of energies whose secrets have long been forgotten. For the purpose of this colloquium, we suggest you consider these assumptions. Early man had a well-developed sacred science, and that this sacred science was an integral part of their overall indigenous science. Early man's indigenous science was closely tied to the landscape and all inanimate and animate objects and the cosmos. Early man was in the possession of extraordinary abilities. They could perceive things and events outside the normal range of the usual accepted sensory abilities. Early man possessed extraordinary capacities to alter the environment, such as being able to influence things at a distance, remote sensing, telergy, and telekinesis. With these assumptions in mind, I would like to introduce George McMullen. George is from Canada and may be one of the few remaining world-class intuitives who specialize in archaeology. He spent many years working with Dr. Norman Emerson, who is considered by many to be the father of Canadian archaeology. Dr. Emerson taught what he called stones and bones archaeology for over 30 years at the University of Toronto. At a chance meeting with George, he discovered that he had unusual intuitive skills, and after working with George in the field for many years, he developed the concept of intuitive archaeology. Dr. Emerson felt that he could reconcile the psychic information George was receiving with both the excavation record and traditional scientific assumptions.
I'd like to add to this at this time that we consider intuitive archaeology to be a tool, another tool that can be used with the other tools that archaeologists and other scientists use. And he adds a certain dimension to this that cannot be readily obtained by just excavation. So again, we'll emphasize this as we go on through this presentation. We're going to jump around the world a little bit now and examine some of the ideas that George has come up with in different parts of the world. I think we'll start in Egypt, George. I thought maybe we'd explore the pyramids for a bit. You might have some things to say about the pyramids and Sphinx, and then we'll move on to maybe Alexander the Great and the Library at Alexandria.
Well, we have quite a gap in history there, but to do with Egypt, I can see that the civilization when they first started to build these huge pyramids, was just a farming community. But within 50 years, they were highly cultured, and they built the pyramids, which even today can't be copied. And so there had to be some outside influence.
And why did they build the pyramids, do you think?
Originally, pyramids were built by the people, and I'll say it from a different dimension,
I see.
consciousness.
Right.
And the pyramids themselves are actually an upside down funnel.
I see.
And the energy from the sun and from the core of the earth generating energy also does come out of the earth in certain places. And it seems to be in line with the stars and so forth. It has to be built in such a way as to take advantage of this energy. And that's why they built these pyramids. The biggest pyramid of Giza was, of course, the strongest of all of them. It was never intended as a burial.
I see.
It took too long to build by what they feel is conventional, with ramps and so forth. It would be an impossible chore, and they would never ever have been able to finish it in a time lapse, they say. These people brought with them instruments who could defy gravity with it.
Nice.
Allow them to move huge weights. And it has to be considered too that the Pacific gravity was less than it is now. So things didn't weigh as much as they do now. And anyway, they were able to make instruments that could lift these heavy weights by utilizing these energy at the top of the pyramid.
Anti-gravitational.
That's right, yeah. And this they did, and they built many pyramids and many other things, and they tried to teach these people at that time how to do these things and to better their life. But instead, they started to worship them and put their own ideas as to what they were, and this isn't what these people wanted. They were able to transfer themselves in these pyramids to their own dimension.
I see.
And when they did this, the Egyptians thought they were going to heaven, and therefore, if they were buried there, that's where they would go. And after these people left them, they still had the tools, but they slowly lost their power. They developed a system of pharaohs and priests and many other things that we wouldn't believe today, but there were nothing to worship, and then they started to bury their pharaohs and so forth and these things, hope that they would go to heaven. But of course, as we all know, the cultural started to diminish, and then in 500 AD, the Arabs came in and pretty well took over. There's still the Coptic people there, but they don't have the power at that time.
Well, then this is an example of interpretive information on a particular site. We now have an example of the interpretive skills that George possesses when he utilizes interpretive archaeology in the field. I think the next important aspect of his work might be to examine how he utilizes the skill to locate sites. And in the same area in Egypt, we find that he had located what we believe the location of the Library of Alexandria, and later on Cleopatra's Palace, and Timbuktu with Alexander the Great's tomb. And I think you'll find this really amazing. George, you might explain or describe, we can start in sequence, how did it come about that you were able to locate the wall of the library?
Well, we had been in the area for about 2 weeks, and we did a lot of driving through the city. And I stopped and spoke to Stephen Swartz about it, and I told him about the library, and he asked me to describe the building. It was actually 2 buildings, 2 square buildings, and they contained racks or stone shelves of scrolls, and in the center of the 2 buildings there was an open area, and there were benches around where these philosophers and scientists would sit and discuss these scrolls and other things. And there was a scribe sitting there writing on papyrus, and there was other people standing there and running to get a scroll if they needed it. That was on the top floor. In the basement area, I explained to Stephen this where they made the papyrus, and there was also a very peculiar short person with a bald head who wore sort of like a white skirt, and it was black in the front, and it was black up to his elbows, and he was the ink maker, and he would sit there mixing his stuff together, and he'd have a flask, and that was wine, and he would pour some into the mixture and pour some down his throat at the same time. And I would suggest that he had a problem with alcohol, but in those days who didn't? But it was just that wherever he worked, even around the stone table, it was black on the floor from the ink. So he was not the cleanest person to work with. But it just shows that there's human beings there, not just figures.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point.
Yeah.
You're able to give us some idea of the people that occupied these sites and how they lived.
Dr. Don Hansen is a geophysicist by training and an extraordinary investigator by nature. At present, he is actively examining the new field of psychotechnology, the use of highly advanced electronic devices used to alter states of consciousness. Don assists in the field by searching for anomalies with the use of a Geiger counter.
And they have proposed a model as to the connection between our three-dimensional reality and the other reality, the timeless, spaceless domain from whence perhaps all of this reality flows. The connection that they have proposed is a connection, a quantum mechanical connection between the 2 realities. And this business of quantum mechanics now comes up in a lot of books that try to relate science to religion. You know, let's find some marriage so that science and religion can live happily ever after. But and it may or may not be so. It turns out that the major physicists, Heisenberg and Einstein, de Broglie, and so on, all were highly intuitive physicists and essentially became mystics. In order to complete a world view, they had to go beyond physics. You can't stop at physics. It's a stopping or a starting phase. If we put physics where we have the physics, that's physics, and then biology, psychology, and then say the soul domain, and spirit. Down here in the physics domain, this is the simplest of all the things. We have only 4 fundamental forces operating. We have the gravity, we have the electromagnetic force, we have the weak and the strong nuclear forces. 4 forces to deal with it that essentially we use to describe the whole domain of physics. When we get up to biology, all of a sudden, what do we have? For a number, how many things are involved? We get up to the psychological level, we try to do an experiment on a man. We don't know what his wife said to him before he left home, or what the baby kept her up all night the night before, or what the grandparents did to him. You know, the chain of stuff that flows down. In order to compare numbers, we might think about the DNA molecule, which is essentially composed of 4 nucleotides. But in the combinations and permutations of these, there are about 3 billion factors that determine what an individual looks like. 3 billion. If you could print 3,000 of these combinations of 4 characters, 3,000 per page, it would take 1,000 page volumes. Volumes of 1,000 pages, 1,000 volumes to describe one man. See, so this is the simple science. This is the one that we can describe. And to try to, you know, get to the spirit up here of the soul is I think enormously. You have to simplify things enormously, far beyond reason. You know, essentially, you have to say, well, all is one, and science and religion therefore 2 aspects of the same thing. Well, that's so simple that it's trivial. It doesn't help us think about anything. So we have to approach things from another level. And we have to approach things the way physics approaches them. We approach them experientially. What are our own experiences? Well, let me back up a bit from what Ray was saying about ancient man being more tuned in to his environment than we are now. See, the Earth got an atmosphere about 1.2 billion years ago. And at the same time, it got water. And at the same time, it got an ionosphere. So, can I write that? Oh, there it is. Okay. Here's the Earth. Here's the ionosphere. And this in between represents a resonant cavity. And the proton flux that comes from the sun beats upon this thing, this ionosphere, like a drum. And it causes waves to be generated that some of them reinforce. And they will reinforce each other in this resonant cavity. Others escape to outer space. Others are absorbed in the Earth. But this resonant frequency is what they call the Schumann frequency, and it's 7.83 cycles per second. You take 60,000 miles a second for the speed of light, 25,000 miles around the Earth, we get that frequency. And so this is the dominant frequency, that frequency and its harmonics. Anything that should go around the Earth and reinforce, this would be the strongest one. Our whole entire evolutionary history has taken place in this bath of 7.83 cycles per second. That's it. The hard-shelled creatures were about 600 million years ago. Before that, we had their progenitors, which were soft-shelled, and they must have started, say, as viruses or enzymes, let's say, 1 billion years ago. But everything has happened in that frequency until 100 years ago. And what happened? Nikola Tesla says, "Hey, let's make this stuff wiggle, and we can send it along the line." And James Clerk Maxwell said, "Hey, these differential equations will tell us how to build a radio." We did. Television grew out of this, microwaves, shavers, electric blankets. Dominantly alone. Our 60 cycle all over the world. Well, all of this, a new electromagnetic regime has happened to all of life in the last 100 years. After 1 billion years of not having it. Well, what are the effects? At one level, there have been some epidemiological studies in Denver about showing an increase in childhood leukemia near transformer stations. The Swedes have done a lot of studies on 500,000 people that they've published just recently. So we have a level of clinical disturbances, things that can be identified clinically. My strong feeling is that there's a whole other realm of subclinical electromagnetic disturbances. The body is, 93 or something percent water. In it, you have electrolytes. Calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. And all of when the field changes, electromagnetic field changes, all of these things jiggle. At another level, every atom is composed of a nucleus and electrons. Each electron has a spin characteristic which orients it with respect to the atom. But the spin has a magnetic vector. And every time the magnetic field changes, the electrons jiggle. And this may be yet another realm which gets into this subtle energy realm, where we get into the realm of electrons, where we get into the realm of quantum mechanics. So these are questions for which I don't have a real answer, but these are questions that have been raised about this. So this model, proposed scientific model, they've tried to put together a model for the connection between thought, between the subtle energy realm and our 3D realm. And it's a model tested, thought about, and it has served me as a means of explaining to myself some of my own internal experiences.
Ray Worring, Research Director of the Investigative Research Field Station, and Keith Wolverton, retired Captain of Detectives, Cascade County Sheriff's Department, have been investigating paranormal phenomena extensively.
I think Keith will start with Bigfoot. If you want to mention where you cast that.
This particular cast was casted in Umatilla National Forest back in, I can't remember what year it was, but we found hundreds of these footprints. And this was one of the better ones, and I casted it. And it's made a very controversial topic. We're not certain of its origin, of course. We don't know exactly what creature this might be. It's felt that this might be a prototype of what it really looks like. Grover Krantz from Pullman University was down in the area just before I was, and he casted several of these and talked to some of the locals, as I did. And the person who was with me was John Andrews. And John has made this, and we've studied quite a few people, and we've talked with a lot of them about what type of creature, what does this creature look like? And this is what he came up with, and he now has a full scale model based upon this as what it probably was or is. Bigfoot is just sort of a fascination with me, and I don't know if it exists or not, but I've spent a lot of time looking for it. I was in Alaska last year. I lived with the Tlingit Indians up there for a short time, and they certainly believed in him, and they had spent quite a bit of time trying to get me to find it, but I didn't have any luck. But there's a whole society out there that does believe in it. And I, like Ray, just sort of take what I don't understand and I try to understand it. And with this particular creature, since about 1975, I spent a lot of time trying to understand it, and I still don't know what it is.
Yeah, we hope to have the opportunity to observe Bigfoot sometime. We talked to George about Bigfoot as well. George has been able to observe Bigfoot. The next topic I'd like us to talk about is the cattle mutilations. And just recently I was in the state of Idaho, and there have been half a dozen more animals mutilated. And who would start with that? When did you start examining those?
1975. Glenn was a sheriff, and I was working for him, and I guess he was sheriff later, but we worked together at that period of time. And ranchers just started calling our department stating that they had a strange creature or whatever. Their cow was dead and they wanted us to go out and find out what killed it. So during that period of time we found hundreds of cattle. Some of them had been cut in such a manner that we're not certain what did it. We coined the current term cookie cutter cut, which is a serrated cut. We found that on a lot of the animals. That, along with this Bigfoot creature, is about as unsolved today as it was in 1975. We don't know what did it then, and today we still don't know. I've been out looking for the cause of that for several years. But Ray has been.
Yeah, I've been out there recently, but Keith wrote a book called Mystery Stalks the Prairie.
Yes.
And about his experiences with the cattle mutilations. I think there are more of the cases happening, but the ranchers are a little bit reserved about reporting it now because it gets mass coverage and they don't want the notoriety. And as he said, we still don't know. It's very interesting. Mutilations take on various unique characteristics. There's ones in Idaho recently, they took just the lips of the animal. They'll take the eyes or the sexual organs. And mysteriously, the predators that usually go after these carcasses don't attack these animals, these dead animals. They're left pretty much alone. I think there was one case where the animal was in a freshly plowed field, and there was no footprints or no evidence of anything coming towards the dead cow. And of course, there's all kinds of theories, governmental experimentation, UFOs, cults, whatever you have, but none of them seems to fit the evidence that we can find at this
None of them make any sense, actually. If it was a government conspiracy to do this, why wouldn't they have their own cows?
Yeah, why would they want to get somebody out? And if it was UFO, they could, they could get a bunch of cows themselves. So that's one of the other mysteries, the sort of unsolved mysteries section of this program. The other one involves this stone, and I'm going to be very careful with it because it was in a fire recently, and it broke. It's quite heavy. It's 15 inches in length, and it weighs 15 pounds.
And 15 inches around.
15 inches around. So that's kind of scary, 666, huh? But it's been they've had very positive experience with this. We have some guests here that had them in their home. I was at the Rome Ranch, so we had this rock there one time, and their children had an experience with this. And it seems like people who handle the stone and work with it feel that subtle energy we're talking about. There's something embodied in the stone. And I'm going to have George take a look at this a little bit later on, and he can psychometrize it and see what might be happening here. A great deal of the positive feelings are with women who hold the stone. So we'll have some of you take a look at this and examine it and see what the kind of experience you might have. And it's been sent to the Smithsonian, and Keith will explain how it was found.
Okay, the man who owns this stone, or who found the stone, found it below the Great Falls of the Missouri River. And he was fishing, and he stepped over this stone and stepped back up, and he and his wife started digging it out of the riverbed. And when he got it out, he noticed that it was sort of unusual looking rock, so he took it home, and this man is a great collector of anything that happens to be around. He threw it on a rock pile. And we don't know a time sequence, this was in the 50s, I believe. And there was a singing noise coming to his house, and he went outside, and there's nobody there, but the singing persisted, and they had the feeling that it was an old person who was wailing, female. And it did it one other time, and the hair on the dog's back stood up, and both this man and his wife went outside, and there's just nothing there. She eventually contacted someone from the Native American Society, and they said, she's talking about the wailing sound that they're hearing around their house, and this Indian indicated that maybe she had brought something home recently that was not in the normal field. What did they bring home? And she described this rock. And they said, well, the rock apparently is what's causing the wailing sound. Bring it from the rock pile and bring it in the house. And they did, and the wailing stopped, and we never heard it again. I've had this rock with me. I've traveled all over the West with it, and I've never had anything happen to me with it, other than the fact that certain people who handle it do get a strong feeling of some sort. And I know that it did move at one lady's house there towards her daughter or granddaughter, and it actually moved on some thick carpet. So what now happens is a fire burned down the house that people own, and the rock cracked, and it broke right in two. Well, the man who owns it says, I want to know if the spirit of this woman is still in there, because he feels strongly that it's a female, that this old Indian woman who was doing the wailing was part of the rock, and now he wants to know if it's still there. So hopefully George will be able to tell me if it's there or not.
Patrick Marsalik with the Investigative Research Field Station talks on transduction mechanisms and stones.
Cryptocrystalline quartz and the various varieties of quartz that are out there, and some of the effects that quartz can have. And I'll just give you a little bit of my knowledge about that and how that applies here. And the way that applies here also applies all around us. In fact, as Ray said, we have stone all around us in various parts of our life. Especially in Montana here, we see it every day when we look out of our windows and see the mountain range. So on a macro scale, we have mountains, and on a micro scale, we have the jewelry that we wear. And even on the smallest scale, we have the individual molecules of quartz. Going into the scientific a little bit of it, quartz has a lot of amazing properties in that it has the ability to transduce energy from one form into another. Most commonly we see that when we wear wristwatches nowadays, and quartz crystals in the watch. And the way that works is there's pressure on the quartz, and it emits an electric pulse at a certain frequency, at a certain response. And they use that to plant the quartz crystal. So quartz can transform pressure into electricity. It can transform heat into electricity. If it's heated up, it can emit electricity. It can emit light. Seems to me there's more, but I'm not sure what they all are. Also, sometimes when one kind of energy is input into the quartz crystal, it just emits free electrons that are floating around the air. It's not necessarily emitted as light or as heat or as energy. And this sometimes results in a static charge that's carried around the stone. So you find that some of the standing stones in England, they find measurable quantities of these exoelectrons, they're called. as a form of static charge, and you can sometimes get static charges from these stones. So anyhow, there's all these mechanisms that seem to be inherent within the way these stones are structured on a molecular level. And the way this all ties in with all of my different investigations and my different quests is it seems to validate some of the, I guess, rumors or superstitions there are around stones, around standing stones. For a long time, the ancients have thought that rubies and emeralds and diamonds were special more than their monetary value, that they had some other kind of power. Perhaps this power could be scientifically explained on a molecular level by these kind of energy forces that are at play with the crystals. And okay, and that ties in with the circles that we've been investigating in the sense that they're mostly, well, they're not mostly, but a lot of them consist of varying amounts of quartz, cryptocrystalline quartz, which includes jasper and agate and chert and chalcedony. All these common stones that we find around Montana are also common in the rocks around us, in the rocks in these circles. And so I feel that to some degree, there's this like subtle level that affects us when we're around these stones, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's a conscious effect all the time. Like I say, I want to touch this stone, it's going to emit electricity necessarily. That there's a field of energy that is in these stones that we interact with as physical beings, and as the electrical beings ourselves, we're also emitting electricity and heat and various kinds of frequencies. So I feel there's an interaction between us and the stones. And this ties in with something I've always felt, that perhaps some of you have felt, is the magical aspect of this landscape that we live in. When we look outside and we see a sunset or a sunrise on these mountains, it does something to our consciousness. It physically affects the way we feel. And when we have those feelings, and those euphoric feelings, there's actually a physical change in our bodies. There's different chemicals that are being emitted inside our bloodstream, and our brainwave frequencies change. So there's an interplay between these stones and our consciousness. And that's something that's been real exciting. And getting back to these stones in particular, part of the research about the molecular structure of these stones is that the defects that are in the crystal structure are equally as important as the crystal structure itself. In that this stone here, say it has all these different colors and has reds and greens, and there's different impurities in there. And what that allows for is all these defects in the structure creates potentials where energy can be stored and transmitted and transduced in various apparently random ways. And we can't measure it scientifically because there are impurities and defects. But those actual impurities and defects can make one rock from a particular place different than a rock from a different place. And that is something that I feel is very, very valid, because when we see a stone, we see someone wearing a stone, and each stone is different. We see and we have a different response to each different stone, and I feel that part of that response is inherent within the makeup of the stone, as well as within the colors that affect our eyes and affect our memories. And so each of these stones, I feel, is also a record of the area where the stone was formulated.
Another dimension that I'd like to just talk about for just a minute. This is about, in the last 10 years, a number of physicists have come up with a number for something that they call the zero-point vacuum fluctuation energy. And this is the energy of a vacuum. They take everything out, there is a potential energy of that vacuum. And Sakharov in Russia was one of them. There's another guy down at the Institute for Advanced Study at Lubbock, Texas, and a third one that all sort of came out at the same time. And the number that they give for the potential energy of vacuum is the biggest number I have ever heard attributed to something which might be a physical reality. And that number is 10 to the 94th grams per cubic centimeter. Well, now, a cubic centimeter, you know, is about that big. 10 to the 94th grams per cubic centimeter. To give you an idea how big this number is, astronomers estimate that all of the elementary particles in the entire universe I don't know how the hell we I don't know how big that is, but electrons, protons, and neutrons, the elementary particles, there are 10 to the 77th of them. So this means that each cubic centimeter contains enough potential energy to build trillions of universes. See? Now, this, I think, is what the ancient mystics called the void, out of which everything comes. This is the plenum, and this is the thing that we want to connect with.
Perhaps we can now appreciate a little better the evidence of ancient man's extraordinary human attributes and indigenous science. We suggest that these petroforms are part of a richly complex development that began with ancient man and whose concepts of energy may now be verified by modern physics. More specifically, we argue that by utilizing intuitives as practiced by Dr. Emerson, we can identify extraordinary versions of this indigenous science and the context in which it was practiced. These structures probably served many purposes, such as records of hunts, maps, and even to facilitate transitions between different states of consciousness. Was ancient man aware of the pulsing zero-point energy described by Dr. Hansen? Or the transduction mechanisms inherent in the stones around him? The very silence of the stones may have been broken. But as always with exploratory research, a whole new series of questions are generated. We do not propose that we have found the answer, but we are only offering one of the many possible solutions to the mysteries of the stones. Join us next time as we continue to explore Montana, the last best place of power.